So BMWs and the problems the older ones suffer, especially ones about this age. So this is a 3 Series that I bought a few years ago and I've been running around in it for a little while. It's been sat for the last couple of months. You may remember a video a little while ago where I said I was having trouble with it, and I suspected it was to do with the turbo, more precisely the VNT veins being clogged up with carbon. Well, I am pretty much 100% that is the issue. So today, the reason it's been sitting around for a couple of months is I just don't get time to work on anything of my own. But today I'm going to whip that turbo off that's nestled down in there, and we're going to get it apart and clean it all out and see if that fixes the problem. So wish me luck. I'll keep you updated as we go. Well, don't you just love cars? I was so hell-bent on getting that rusted up screw out, I went to the trouble of cutting a slot in it and wasting 5 minutes. Didn't realise it's already broken away from the main housing. So, yeah, that's 5 minutes wasted. Anyway, let's press on. So, an area to be super careful with if you're doing this job. So down here on the end of the actuator arm, you might be able to see it just here, there is a circlip. Now, this is in an awkward area. I'm using a 90-degree pick like this. Be super careful and try and have a magnet down there if you're going to take this off, because they like to just spring off and disappear. So I'm going to do that with 2 hands. The camera won't be on it, but I'll show you once we've got it off. Okay, so there's the little fighter. Just a tiny circlip, put that somewhere safe so we don't lose it, and carry on. Busy day pulling overtime at work, then fixing my own car. It's got to be a Five Guys for lunch. Whopping great double cheeseburger, and for some reason, a massive pile of chips. I don't even think I'm going to be able to carry on after this. So that's the electronic turbo actuator on these cars. Now, when the veins clog up, like I suspect they have on this one, you will get a lot of codes for the turbo actuator, and a lot of people replace it, and it turns out to be a total red herring. So always check this first. But now we've got the actuator out of the way, we can see the VNT vein arm here, which has the connecting rod onto it, and I'm pushing with all my might on that, and it is not moving. Now, I should be able to move that freely if the VNT veins are clear of carbon. So I think that confirms that's our problem. Right, let's carry on. Let's get this turbo off and get it cleaned out. So then the turbo is held on to the manifold in a couple of ways. You've got 2 bolts here, 1 sneaky little bolt hidden inside that hollow there on top of the manifold, and these are as you can see, they're like a reverse spline, but the best thing to use for them is it's 10mm socket, but it's 12-sided, so you get the right grip on there. If you try and go on there with a 6-sided, you're just going to probably round off those edges that you need to get the grip on. So I'm going to crack these off now, and then we've just got to undo that band clamp there at the back, and then the whole unit will slide off. I've left this lower pipe on for a bit of support. I'll get that off when I pull the turbo away. Okay, so lower intercooler pipe off then. That one is a pain while it's in situ because the way that the retaining clips go, just a bit of a nightmare. But the top turbo bolts are slackened, so all I've got to do now, get on that band clamp, slacken that, remove those couple of bolts there. I've taken the 3rd one out in that hollow, not that you can see in there very well. And then it's off and we're good to go. There was another oil feed, well, the oil feed just in there that you can probably see. You've got to be careful as well. There's a washer under that you have to rescue as well, because if it goes back on without the washer, it'll leak oil. So there we go, that's all undone and now ready to come off. Okay, so our turbo's off the car on the floor then. So there is the oil return pipe to disconnect when it's still on the car as well, which is what I was fighting with just there. And also there was 1 mounting bracket that I didn't realise was on this. It just goes in the bottom there. It's a little 13mm bolt. But we can see now what we're up against. So there's a hot side and a cold side to the turbo. So this is the hot side, the exhaust side. This is the cold side, which is the intake side. Just checking as well, the impeller itself For a car that's on 190,000 miles, there is almost no play in that turbo shaft whatsoever, so I'm really happy with that. I can't see any signs of it contacting the housing inside. So the actual internals themselves, especially on the cold side, are in good health. However, the hot side, which is what we're fighting against, we can see just how much carbon and soot is built up in there. I mean, I've just put that down for a second and look at it. So we can see it is absolutely filthy in there. So what we've got to do then is separate the hot side from the cold side. So we're going to have to undo these bolts around this circumference here, which will separate the cartridge, and I'll be able to get to the VNT system then and clean it all up. So let's get going. Okay, that's all 6 bolts cracked then. I'll whiz these out and we'll get it separated. Okay, now often on a car with a turbo this old and with this much mileage, you're probably going to have to just gently knock the 2 sections apart by some gentle taps with a hammer. We'll see how we get on. I'll just see if I can just sort of twist it and prise it first. It doesn't seem that bad, but we might just have to give it a bit of gentle persuasion. Okay, so this turbo is fairly well stuck together. So I'm just going to apply a little bit of heat to the joint now. Nothing major, just enough to sort of expand everything a little bit. But I don't want to go too crazy. There we go. Right, so there she is apart. Important to make sure you keep that sealing ring. And there is our exhaust side. So we can strip that down now and get the vanes out. So to get into the vanes then, I have to release the vane mechanism here from the hot side, well, from the actual cartridge itself. So as you can see, I'm just opening that joint up now. I've just been working around gently and just going bit by bit by bit, trying not to damage it. So once that's out, then I can get all that carbon brushed out. There we go. And lift off. And there we can see the VNT vanes and the amount of carbon in the housing. That is disgusting. No wonder it's getting caught up. Right, let's get on with cleaning this. So it turns out then that it's not actually the vanes themselves that are stuck. So they're supposed to move nice and freely. And as you can see, that ring gear moves lovely. So that's exactly how I want it. What's actually happened then is the actuator arm that's mounted here is seized up with all the carbon around it there. So I'm just going to brush a little bit off to start with and just show the difference. I mean, at the moment, I'm having to get a spanner on it and put quite a lot of force into moving that. That's ridiculous. So let's try and free that up to start with. Right, now I want to work that actuator arm a little bit while that oven cleaner is on there, just to sort of work that into the mechanism. That'll start freeing it up nicely for me. So we can see already just how much carbon that's removed just from that one pass. So I'm going to give this a couple more goes and we should have it working perfectly. So day 2, I have left the turbo soaking overnight with some of that oven cleaner, that foaming cleaner, and the arm is a lot freer than it was. But what I'm going to do is just put a little bit of maintenance oil in and work it back and forth just so I can get it completely freed up. And then I'm going to give it another good clean out and a blowout, and then we're ready to start reassembling. Nothing major, just start off with a few drops, and then I'm just going to keep working that mechanism back and forth, let that oil penetrate down around that joint, and hopefully we get nice free moving actuator rod. So at that point then, I'm happy with the way the arm's moving. So I'm going to line the vanes back up now, slot them back in, and then we'll build the housing back together and get it all bolted up and start to reassemble it and put it on the car. This is where it gets a bit finicky now. Just giving it a gentle tap home. Right, well, good news is them vanes are moving nicely now. Okay, so everything's moving nicely. Time to get the hot side housing back on. As I mentioned in the previous video, these ones are pretty foolproof when you're putting them back together because there's a notch there and there's a pin in the housing. But it's always a good idea to make a mark on the housing if you haven't got the pin, the locating pin, so you know exactly how it goes back on. Putting the rings on and making sure they're sitting in the right position. Right, now this lump's back together, time to get it back in the car. So, starting, I'm going to drop the oil return pipe into the oil return pipe down there, and then establish the bottom bolt bracket, and then we'll get the band clamp on and go from there. I've wrestled it back into place then. Before I put any of the bolts in, I'm just going to take a second to do up the Jubilee clamp on the oil return line at the bottom. It's super important then, before you go too far, make sure that manifold gasket is slid in, ready to receive those bolts when the turbo drops back into position. And then next step, I'm going to get the 13mm mounting bolt underneath into the bottom of the turbo so I know it's solid, and then we'll go on with the band clamp around the exhaust joint. Right, oil feed back on then. I've done the top bolts, I've done the band clamp, and I've done the lower mount, and I've made sure the oil returns on. So the washer, one of the most important parts, really finicky to actually get in, especially when you've got gloves on. But we're going to try and just lay it down just over the housing there, because I really don't want to lose this. This is a problem if we drop the washer. Apologies about the camera angle, because you probably can't see what I'm doing, but I just want to get it roughly in place, and then I'll guide it the rest of the way to where I need it with the bolt itself. There we go. Right, so oil feed bolt then has its own washer on as well, so you have a sealing washer either side. And then again, mega fiddly, but feed that through the oil feed housing. Banjo as they're known. And then we're going to send that down into place. Now this is where it gets really fiddly. Trying to establish the thread on it while keeping the washer and everything in place. Bit fiddly this one, but you just got to guide it through. Right, boost pressure sensor then, another fiddly one because we've got that washer and it's got to go on that housing there. So just a case of needing 3 or 4 hands to be able to do it, but only having 2. Right, actuator back on then, and then for the nerve-wracking part, which is the circlip that goes on the arm, but let's just get it mounted first. I'm quaking in my boots about losing this, but let's see if we can clip it on. Success!